program for graduate studies at Charles Darwin University. Greetings to you. My name is Tara Brabazon and I'm the Dean of Graduate Studies at Charles Darwin University, and we're about to introduce a very important and innovative mode of doctorate to CDU. This is the PhD by prior publication. Therefore, I wanted to present as early as possible for you a Touchstone Beginnings session so that our supervisors are thinking actively about this important mode of enrolment, of candidature and of research. This is a very special mode of doctorate, and therefore my presentation today will talk about its history as its mode and its form. And then we're going to spend some time exploring how this may operate in your supervisory life and your particular discipline. So let's do this. I absolutely understand why some very experienced supervisors, many of whom are listening to this session, may have had through their entire career very little connection with the PPP. It is a minority mode of doing a PhD, and I certainly had supervised over 100 research degrees to completion before my first PPP arrived. Indeed, I'd actually supervised over 30 artefact and exegesis theses, another minority enrolment, before the PPP arrived. But having said that, this mode of doing a doctorate is now undergoing a spurt of growth. Let me tell you a little bit about its history, and then we'll talk about the challenges with it, and then how to supervise it. In 1992, in the United Kingdom, the former polytechnics became universities. So Manchester Polytechnic became Manchester Metropolitan University, Southampton Poly became Southampton Solent University. And this was a higher education-wide, an industry-wide movement, which required industry-wide, sector-wide policies, procedures and quality assurance protocols. The CNAA, the Council of National Academic Awards, moved the polytechnics into the university system. There were many challenges in this movement, and one was that the staff in the former polytechnics that suddenly became the new universities did not have PhDs. So they were academics with long and distinguished careers in teaching and research. But in the poly sector, they tended to not have a PhD. So this movement by the CNAA to move the polys to the university was also tethered to a movement and change in the doctoral space. The movement to the PhD by prior publication occurred so that those staff at the former polytechnics with publications could bundle them all together with an intro and with an outro and create a PhD. And yes, this was highly controversial at the time. And of course, I had an insider view of this movement because my late husband, Steve Redhead, was a member of the CNAA. And so I received the context around this moment in higher degree history. And certainly it was controversial at the time. And these are the sort of controversies that emerged. What number of articles would be equivalent to a PhD? What about authorship and co-authorship? How could originality be proven over work conducted over many years? In fact, in some cases, a couple of decades. And how would this mode of thesis ever be equivalent to 100,000 words written precisely for the purpose of researching and submitting a PhD? Because, of course, refereed articles have very different aims, outcomes, audiences, and a different point than a PhD. So these are important questions, and they're good questions. This, therefore, was a crunchy moment of quality assurance for national systems of doctoral regulation. And I would argue this reflection was incredibly important. So here we are, nearly 40 years later. The PhD by prior publication is here to stay, and many of these issues have been resolved. But as you can see, that original aim or goal has now dissipated. We have more people in doctoral programs around the world than at any point in the history of our universities. And when a junior faculty post, if I use the language from North America, when a lectureship post is advertised, 3/4 of the candidates, at least, already have PhDs, even for the most junior of posts. So the original aim to ensure that experienced staff had a pathway to the doctorate, that their prior outstanding research could be recognised in some form. That original aim, of course, is gone, but the degree remains. And I've been watching it for the last decade through this sort of restart of interest, and some trends and tendencies are emerging. We're seeing, and this is amazing, we're seeing the elite professions, and I'm talking law and medicine, start to dominate the enrolment. So men and women who have had professional careers, who have published during those professional careers, they look back at their suite of publications and think, right, there's a doctorate there, and you know what, they're frequently right, there is. And they've dominated the PPP ranks since I've taken over and worked as dean in the last couple of universities. So they've dominated this space. But recently, can I say, I've been receiving approaches from a much wider group of people, mostly from the United States, and particularly in the disciplines of the social sciences, and they're linked with local government, public service, city planning. And these students have a career of articles, let's say about urban development or transportation, have been big examples, and they inquire as to whether this mode of thesis would suit them. And of course, this mode of doctorate suits them brilliantly. So we are, I think, at the cusp of this mode of doctorate expanding once more as baby boomers retire and wish to codify their career with a doctorate. We're also seeing successful professionals from my generation, so Generation X, realising that they've accumulated a lot of research doing their job, and perhaps it could be reorganised with care for a doctorate. Okay, so I've set the scene for you there. That's why we're here. Let's now get into the shape of a PhD by prior publication. The PhD by prior publication has two parts. The contextual statement, that in some systems is also referred to as an integrating essay, and then a selection of publications. Now, it is possible to have published 6 or 8 articles, bundle them together with a contextual statement, and get a PhD by prior publication. Yes, it is possible, but a student has to be incredibly lucky that all their publications through their life are nested into a particular cluster of knowledge, and that particular clustering of articles tells a story of research and scholarship. The most common mode of entry is for someone with a hell of a lot of publications. And I'll give you the story of a great mate of mine, a very successful PPP student, Dr. Randall Morton. Hi, Randall. Randall was a remarkable surgeon based in Auckland, and through his career he had developed 160 refereed articles to choose from. So the first stage in the PhD by prior publication is the selection of articles. If a student has 8, and that's all the student has got, and they're clustered in an area and they develop an argument, brilliant, the student has been lucky. But mostly I think we're going to have students like Randall. Most people coming into the PPP have many publications, and therefore the student and the supervisor together must make a selection. So let's get into it. How do we make that selection? Firstly, a student must select all or the overwhelming majority of papers where they are the sole or the first author. Now, I am aware in some disciplines that can't occur, and of course maths is the clearest example of that. But it must be the student's work that is being assessed. So if the student is the sole author, again, no problems, great, thanks for playing. If there is a co-authorship issue, then it is the student's responsibility to prove to the examiners that it was the student's work, or the overwhelming majority of the student's work. And students are going to have to confirm that and that contribution in great depth in the thesis. Now, we have seen problems in the past where students put in even one publication where they're the third author, and the examiners balk and say it's not their work. So we need to be aware of those risks. So firstly, make a selection on authorship. First author, sole author. Then we're making a selection on content. What we are after are articles and book chapters and books that tell a research story. That is, they slot together like jigsaw pieces. This discovery led to this discovery, led to this discovery. And that research story is my original contribution to knowledge. So a student needs to select articles, then a student needs to organise and order them to see if there is a coherent story emerging through these articles. Right, first job done. Great. Let's get to the tough bit. And the tough bit is the contextual statement, which is also called an integrating essay. So what must this statement do? And can I say it's a long statement. It must be at least 10,000 words. It can go up to 20, 30, 40,000 words. So what must this statement do? It must demonstrate the candidate's capacity to conduct original research. So this is significant. This is different from the conventional PhD. A candidate is also being assessed via the proxy of the contextual statement. So let's get this bit sorted, because really this is the pass or fail bit of this story. And I want to sort of summon that old football chant and get our students going. And the old football chant is, who are ya, who are ya, who are ya? So we need to start with, who is the student? And why should we care? So students need to write down who they are, why we should care about who they are, and where have these articles come from? And why does a student believe that a PhD has been formed, an original contribution to knowledge has been formed through these articles? We need to answer those questions. So the next bit to worry about in the contextual statement is demonstrating the original contribution to knowledge. This is quite challenging, as much of the work we're dealing with here may be historic. So yes, absolutely, it was original in 1994. What about now? So again, originality for the traditional PhD means slightly different things in a PhD by prior publication, particularly in how we make the case for originality. The candidate shows how their research made an original contribution to knowledge by telling the story of the research. And this is the tricky bit. It's like, in many ways, the creative-led PhD. The exegesis is the deal breaker. It's the same as the traditional PhD, but a bonsai thesis. Just everything in the original plant is there, it's just smaller. And so with the PhD by prior publication, the trick and the challenge is to take these disparate pieces and through a contextual statement, link them. And that's hard enough. And then we have to link them in a way that proves originality. The publications do not speak for themselves. Publications are not a PhD. Refereeing is not examination. The mistakes made in this mode of doctorate occurs when it's assumed by the student and the supervisor that the publications speak for themselves. Trust me, they don't. We all produce hundreds of refereed articles through our career, but we produce one PhD. The student and supervisor have to demonstrate, they have to prove the originality. And we can't assume that refereeing means too much at this point. This thesis will pass or it will fail on the contextual statement, just like creative-led theses pass or fail on the exegesis, because these documents are the mediator, they're the filter, they're the funnel for the research. So let me tell you the story of the research. That's what we're doing. What is the story of the research? And we need to do this overtly. So what was the context around each of these pieces? How did they develop? What is the research contribution in each article? And then how do they align to do something startling, original, and important? So the student must talk overtly about each piece and use citations if they can, if students have them, to show how the work has been used. We can go into impact and engagement. We can go into significance and esteem. Now, obviously, these sorts of metrics will vary enormously between disciplines, but the key general point is the student is going to have to prove originality. Now, this may activate impact and engagement following the citations and the uses of the research. And particularly in health, can I say, I've seen contextual statements shaped via impact and engagement to confirm originality, and they've worked really well. The key mistake made in this mode of doctorate, and we see it over and over again, is articles are thrown together. We have no sense of the ordering or the relationship between them. And the contextual statement, well, I've seen someone unbelievably do this with bullet points. So they bullet point the contextual statement. They list where the articles were published and the year, and they list the citations. So it's a list. And that's it. That's their contextual statement. And needless to say, that particular PhD by prior publication did not pass. Nowhere near a pass. But if we make the case for the research, we orient the examiner into the research world, then the thesis will do very, very well. My final few comments are about the PhD by prior publication more generally. And again, this is particularly a new and significant point. What is considered a publication? Now, firstly and obviously, the work must be published. PhD by prior publication. The work must be published. So unpublished work cannot be considered. But in terms of the published work, this is really significant. Through the history of this mode of doctorate, refereed articles have dominated the submission. But scholarly monographs, chapters in books, exhibitions, films, sonic artefacts can also be included. Now that's a new and interesting intervention in this field. Let's see where it goes. Now, what is frequently shunned in this mode, what is not used, are review articles. Review articles are not used, which I know is incredibly controversial in medicine and allied health in particular. But also newspaper articles are not used. Articles in non-refereed professional journals are not used. Or, and this is important, work that has been successfully or unsuccessfully submitted for another degree. Also, works on which the candidate was an editor rather than an author. Presentation matters a lot in this mode of thesis. In all doctorates, to be frank, I think students and supervisors underestimate the role of presentation because a messy, ill-ordered, error-ridden thesis unsettles the examiner, and problems with form can be a proxy for problems with content. For the PhD by prior publication, we need to take the time to ensure that the publications are gleaming. They're rationally ordered and organised, and by the way, that may not be chronologically, because they've got to make sense in the development of knowledge. Then we must ensure that the contextual statement is beautifully written, conveys who a student is, conveys their research ability, and how the publications have come to be. Then we nail down that original contribution to knowledge. Use the sentence, my original contribution to knowledge is, be overt, be clear, and yes, make the case. Don't assume the case. And that is how a student passes a PhD by prior publication. The enrolment is about 6 months. It can go to 12 months, and it can be part-time and full-time. But if a student and a supervisor are clear on what is needed to do in this mode of enrolment, it will be an incredibly successful, if an incredibly brief, candidature. I thank you so much for sharing this time with me, and I really look forward to our future conversations about the PhD by prior publication. See you at the next Touchstone session. Thank you for listening to Touchstones, our professional development program for graduate studies at Charles Darwin University.